Great. So I was asked to talk about coastal and climate change, particularly in South India. And I just have two apologies before I start. One is, I think the slides might be a little bit chaotic because I think when you say coastal and climate change, there's so many interconnected things that it would probably take an hour if I wanted to like talk about all of it, and probably get become super boring and not useful. So I've tried to pull out a few themes that make sense and are useful in this context, and then hopefully we can have a little bit of a discussion at the end. And if there are questions or just more thoughts or something, those can come there as well. And the other thing also that I want to apologize for is that a lot of my examples are going to be primarily from Tamil Nadu and Kerala. I did want to include more from the other states, but I mostly done my fieldwork in Tamil Nadu, so I want to share from my own experiences. And Kerala is also my home state, so again, like just drawing from my own lived experiences. Having said that, again, I'm hoping that there are people who understand the context of other states in South India. Some of that um, can come out as well. Okay, so just jumping back into talking directly about climate change, right? A lot of what we hear and what we talk about in climate change, one of the things we hear about is erosion, very commonly heard. So this is a photo. I think I had a similar photo, but I couldn't find it. So this is a photo I've taken from Wikimedia, which is in a place called Valiyatura in Trivandrum. So if anybody has been to the Shangamugam beach area, you will have seen the rapidness with which the erosion sort of happened, right? Um, and when you look at data from the states as well, you see you see that in both Kerala and Tamil Nadu, more than 40% of the oceans, of the coastline is eroding, um, and much less is stable, right? And these numbers are also a little bit, they're slightly different numbers, so they could also be differing in that sense. And then let's take the example of Kerala specifically. So while there's about 45% of the coast is being seen as eroding, that doesn't mean that all the rest of it is stable. There's also coasts that are accreting, which also means that it's not actually like a stable coastline. And then if you go one step further and look at the district level, so this is Thrissur district, which is in mine, where um, the actual eroded coast or eroding coast shows as only 1.5%, right? Whereas 41% is accreting, but only 5% is stable. So what's happening with more than like 50%, which is that these are what are called artificial coasts. So an artificial coast is when a coast gets formed um, because there are artificial protections, right? So this could be seawalls or groins that are sort of protecting the coast and create artificial beaches where you wouldn't have had the beach if not for these structures, right? And um, again with the seawalls as well, a lot of accretion also is oftentimes um, a result of the seawalls themselves. Now, so in when we're talking about climate change, quite often this is the kind of stuff you do keep hearing about. So we hear a lot of data, a lot of stuff that's aggregate a lot of conversations that's happening at the sort of high level. But what we hear much less of is what does all of this actually mean at the very local level, right? Because climate change is often such a global problem, and understandably, because it's so massive, it's so global, it kind of becomes like the opposite of the phrase we miss the woods for the trees, but in fact with climate change, often the reverse happens, where we must miss the trees for the woods, because there's also a lot of um, specific things that are happening in small spaces that just sort of get left behind. So I want to tell you about one particular beach to start with. So this is Vadanapalli Beach, which is a beach that's near my house. And so, this is a small local beach where you rarely ever find tourists, even from the town. Like, it's mostly people within like a 6 to maximum 10-kilometer radius who come there. A lot of the local fishers use the area to, store their boats. There are a few small shacks that sell tea and some fish and paramburi and things like that. And mostly it's a space also for leisure, for couples who come and spend time together, families who come with their children to play and things like that. This is a photo from December 2023 in the Vadanapalli beach. And I hope it's clear. Uh, and this is a photo from 6 months later in July 2024, right? It's just been like it's a 6 month gap, and you can already see the kind of erosion that's happening very, like, sort of very visibly. And I think I've gone there once after this. I don't have photos, but there's a part of the beach that's just sort of shrunk to the point where you can't walk across. Like, you'd have to choose to either walk like in the water, or you'd have to choose to walk like really high up on the shore. You can't continue along your path because that whole this whole sand has just sort of broken down and eroded, right? um and this is just like minor things in some senses. Um it's these are, I mean, you'd call them like minor impacts, right? Where people are finding it difficult sorry people are finding it difficult to use the beaches. One of the consequences that's happening is that there's been a shift in the real estate prices. So it's not gotten to a place where people are needing to move away or getting displaced, like what happens in like several other places. But it's also like these minor impacts are an omen to what we're looking towards, right? Um, and it's sort of like it almost foretells a case of where the Vadanapalli beach will potentially become like the Sangomal beach, where people will not be able to live there anymore. And again, like the real estate prices is one, like the real estate prices dropping is one example. And we were told by the one of the people who was living there, he was like, the houses here, if you want to buy, are just, they're basically being sold at such cheap prices. They're like almost giveaway prices, right? Um, so thinking again about the kinds of impact that loss of that erosion has, right? Some, like the loss of land, is very evident, the fact that people get displaced. But if you look at some of the work that Mahabaleshwar Hegde has done in Karnataka, for example, he talks about how, because a lot of people who live close to the coast, very close to the sea on the coastline, don't have pattas, they don't have titles. And so one of the things that happens is that when there is a loss of land from erosion, you'll also find that you don't have a space to get compensation from the government. You may not necessarily get rehabilitation. You might struggle to, uh, sustain your commons, for example, right? And if you look at it, if even in the like CZMP maps, for example, not all of them necessarily recognize fishing hamlets that exist. The other very evident one is the loss of livelihood, which again, if you're a fisher and you've been displaced, and even if you're rehabilitated, like for example, in Sangumal, and in Vinyam port in Kerala, the fishers were moved away by about 2 kilometers from the coastline, right? And so that, what is it for a fisher to live 2 kilometers away from the sea, where, questions of where do you park your boats, how do you travel to your workplace, which is basically the sea, how do you even, assess what the sea looks like, if it's safe for you to go into it if you can't see. Um, and a lot of invisible impacts on women. So, for example, in Rameshwaram in Tamil Nadu, there was a woman who was telling me about how, when they were living near the coast, one of the things she used to do was collect crabs. And she would also make some extra money on the side by showing foreign tourists how to catch crabs. This was not her main income or her main livelihood. Like, she was running a tea stall for tourists, and that was her main job. But then she was able to, catch crabs for subsistence and to improve food security in the family, and also to add a little bit of additional income, right? And in that calculation, a lot of that sort of goes missing. And again, a lot of invisible non-economic impacts of erosion, right? So loss of public space. When you have a coast becomes an important place where you gather, you hold meetings, you just, have cultural activities. It's where a lot of community space is lost when you don't have access to the coast anymore. And again, loss of kinship ties, because a lot of communities live very close to each other. But when there is displacement, communities tend to sort of get distributed and divided up. Um, and then that means that, they have, an aunt who was very close is now living 5 kilometers away from you in a different part, right? And what impact does that then have on family structures? And again, much less talked about mental health. So in the climate change conversation, there's a lot of conversation about climate anxiety of, say the Gen Z people and a lot of people in urban areas, but the climate anxiety of people who are living on the coast, seeing the impact of climate change in very real terms, is again something that's not talked about. And the other part of this is also the invisible non-economic impacts on women. So one example that I want to give you is like menstrual health. Again, completely not talked about, but thinking about what happens with women when they moved away, or when there are frequent cyclones or other kinds of sudden onset events. Um, in terms of their access to clean water, their access to menstrual products, again with kinship ties, because a lot of the caregiving when a woman is on her period might be being done by friends and neighbors, and if people are moved and there's a loss of kinship ties, how does that sort of impact menstrual health, right? So there's a lot of these sort of aspects that are not talked about. Okay, I'm going to jump through the next few ones because I'm running short of time. But again, just looking at another set of impacts, which is around mangroves. This is in terms of the total mangroves lost globally and mangroves lost in India. Again, the numbers are not very clear on this. Um, and again, looking at the kind of stories and impacts that are behind these numbers, right? So this is a photo from Pichavaram, and the men that you see in the boat, they're sort of doing they're doing like small scale fishing, small nets, and the woman that you see in the photo is part of a larger group that's doing prawn collection by hand. So she dives into the water, picks up the prawns from the bed of the water, and that's also their income. So again, stories like these that sort of get left behind in the uh, in the narrative around climate change. Now, quickly moving to blue carbon. So, um, one of the biggest solutions that's been proposed worldwide is the concept of blue carbon. So, blue carbon is basically marine ecosystems. This could be seagrass beds, or mangroves and tidal marshes, kelp forests in places where there are kelp forests, and all of these. are spaces that store a lot of carbon, and they cover 49 million hectares globally. And the reason that blue carbon is very important is because blue carbon sources typically capture between 2 to 4 times the carbon that's sequestered by terrestrial forest systems. So you can see why that, becomes very big as part of the narrative of how to solve climate change. And blue carbon itself sits within the larger narrative of the blue economy. Now, the blue economy, so one part of the blue economy is around conservation. So there is this concept of $1 million reef that the Nature Conservancy, which is an international NGO, has come up with. And that idea is that with conserving forests, conserving a reef, which is, in through tourism, through sport fishing, and through, activities that don't exploit in some senses, you can have a reef that can give you $1 million. So this is one of the concepts. This is one idea of like neoliberal conservation that is promoted through the blue economy, right? And so again, going back to just the mangroves part of it. So in India now, with the blue economy, blue carbon idea, we have a new government initiative called Mishti, which essentially budgets some amount of money to state governments to plant mangroves and to increase the cover of mangroves, and also for community development, um, and so on. And it also expects states to start to have mangrove cells within the forest department that are working on this protection, right? But this is not a straightforward idea. There are a lot of ecological challenges to mangrove plantation. So the soil has to be just right. The water, the salinity of the water has to be just right. And globally, less than 20% of the mangroves that have been planted actually survive. But there are also challenges legally in terms of the land category, which is that because most mangroves are not classified as forests within India, a lot of the mangroves that you see, especially in South India, so most of the mangroves in India are either in the Sundarban region, so they're within a national park, or they are primarily in South India. Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra, Karnataka has a little bit. And most of these fall within private land, right? So, in terms of how do you do plantations on private lands, becomes a question. And then the other part of it is where communities are not involved and they don't see a very clear sort of benefit to why they should have mangroves, because this can mean a loss of land for them. So, again, one example from Kerala where we'd uh, uh, spoken to these brothers of the Pokudan Trust. So they've been doing a lot of mangrove plantation. Their father, Kallin Pokudan, is a very well-known environmental activist in Kerala who's sort of single-handedly, restored a lot of mangroves. And they were giving us an example of where they had started mangrove plantations in one particular panchayat. And they had had conversations with the Gram Sabha, they'd spoken to the panchayat, the community was on board. They started the plantations. Everything was going really well. It had been like a year and the saplings were growing well and everything was going good. And then the community heard from external people that if they raised mangroves, it would become classified as a forest and they would lose access to that entire stretch of the land and water and the marshes where the mangroves were. So a year into the plantation, community members have gone and they have basically cut down all of the saplings that they had grown for a year, because they were concerned about loss of access to those spaces. And again, none of which is really talked about in this as well. Okay, I'm running short of time, but I will quickly just do one other aspect of this, which is, so one part of the blue economy is around blue carbon, and there are challenges to that. But there is another bigger part to the blue economy. So just show you like a short video, and I hope you can hear it. If there's an issue with the sound, please just let me know.
I couldn't hear it actually.
Oh, you can't hear the sound. Okay.
Yeah.
I am not sure how to fix that. Um, okay. I'm. Can you guys? Can you
Yeah,
see the
now we can
subtitles?
hear it actually.
Okay. Okay. Now you can. I'll just go back in.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I think we can't hear it.
Yeah, now we can't hear it. Yeah. Immediately we could able to.
Okay. Okay. It's just a really short video, so I'm not gonna waste time trying to figure out the logistics. Um, can I just run it through, and if you guys can read the
Yeah,
subtitles, and then I will just summarize it.
sure, yeah.
Okay, so if you guys weren't able to hear and or like read, basically he's talking about how the blue economy is not just about coral reefs; it's about a whole suite of industries. So he mentions ocean transportation, shipping, offshore energy, aquaculture, um, and how all of the aim of all of these is to be sustainable and solve the climate crisis through offshore energy and shipping and things like that, right? Um, and this part of the blue economy emerges in India through the Sagarmala project. So Sagarmala projects come out in 2015. And essentially, it talks about port-led growth, right? So the idea is that there will be a series of ports across the country, along with roads and railways that connect all the ports to each other, and coastal economic zones, like so special economic zones on the coast, which are manufacturing clusters. And the idea behind the Sagarmala project is basically to try and to create what is being called port-led growth, right? So increase the value of the blue economy, where things were transported through land. For example, they would be transported through sea. So the Karwar port expansion, for example, or the port expansion in Pulicat in Tamil Nadu, all of these are sort of projects that are happening within the Sagarmala. But there are also smaller projects that are happening within the Sagarmala. So there are the major ports, but there are also minor ports. There are harbors that are being built in a lot of different places, all of which falls in the larger umbrella of the Sagarmala, right? And again, just to keep in mind that according to the World Bank's narrative, the blue economy is supposed to solve climate change. So the idea is that construction of ports is going to somehow solve climate change, even though there are two parts of the blue economy, one of which is supposed to be about um, climate change. As you can see, a lot of the actual focus is around port projects. And sorry, just give me a second. Um, I'm going to skip the next few slides actually, and go directly to just again just highlighting this idea that although the narrative of the blue economy is around protection of the coasts, blue carbon, saving the world from climate change. The reality of um blue carbon and blue economy in India is really that it's just infrastructural projects, right? And one just final example that I want to give you of what that means in real terms for people, right? So this is Sangumal. Sangumal is a beach in Rameshwaram. So if you guys have been to Rameshwaram, it's on the so there is a temple called Agni Tirtham, and right after Agni Tirtham there's a stretch of beach called Sangumal. And Sangumal, this is a photo from, sorry, this is a satellite image from 2009, sorry, 2008. And if you can see, there's pretty much nothing in Sangumal. Sangumal was primarily like a fishing beach. So the pilgrimage tourism sort of ends at Agni Tirtham, and then the fishers take over. And it's again a stretch of just about a kilometer, right? Like the Vadanapalli beach that I was talking about earlier. It's just 1 kilometer. But in that 1 kilometer, there were a lot of fishers that were using. About 21 villages were using this 1 kilometer stretch of the coast to park their boats primarily, boats and nets and things like that. And this photo of the coastal commons is from 2012, where a lot of the space still was as it was, right? Um, this is a satellite image from 2019, I think. Yeah, 2019, where under tourism within the blue economy, there's a project called Swadesh Darshan, which is basically, among other things, wants to develop tourism in like coastal areas, right? So, in the name of tourism and blue economy, and in fact conservation, because the Nature Conservancy's idea is that tourism is going to protect the coast, right? What they have done is created a promenade. All of these white things you see are basically new resorts that are coming up. The green bits are fenced off areas, and the brown bits are under construction. And basically, at the end of this, there is this one stretch which is about 100 meters. And this stretch of 100 meters is the only part of the commons that's still left for the fishers to use. So the woman that I was talking about who used to collect crabs, right? That woman is from Sangumal, and she used to use the intertidal zones for the crab collection, as well as selling tea to drivers who would come with the pilgrimage tourists, right? And now she has no way to access the beach at all because there is barely any beach left for her to access. It's just this, like, it's literally just this whole stretch, right? So I just want to end with this one quote that one of the fishers used in Rameshwaram. And the word he used was Udukki Vekkaranga, which is, even in Malayalam, those who speak Malayalam, Udukka it means to like organize or tidy. And so the idea that because fishers have traditionally occupied large stretches along the coast, very close to the coast. But then this hampers the ideas of infrastructure development, tourism, all of these ideas that are coming within the blue economy. And so there's a kind of zonation that is attempted to be done, where you push all of the fishers to one side, you keep all the tourists on a different side, you keep the projects on a different side, so you like neatly sort of tie up the coast into little blocks. So I'm just going to end with that idea. And